Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's special report. Last Thursday, just before sunrise, the capital city of Ouagadougou woke up to an operation that shocked not only the people of Burkina Faso, but also international observers. In a matter of hours, security forces carried out 17 simultaneous raids across the city, each one ordered directly by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. At first glance, the targets looked harmless. They appeared to be aid organizations, development offices, and technology hubs. But when investigators went inside, they discovered something far more dangerous. These places were actually nodes in a massive digital spying network. In just one morning, over 2 million files containing the personal data of Burkina citizens were seized and secured. Reports confirmed that the stolen information included biometric details, call logs, and even secret government communications. This discovery has sent shockwaves across Africa and raised a serious question. How deep is foreign interference in Africa's digital systems? Very quickly, eyes turned toward Israel. Many analysts say that under the leadership of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel has quietly built what some now call a digital empire in Africa over the last 15 years. Documents and intercepted files show that under the cover of humanitarian projects and international aid, Israeli-linked companies inserted themselves into African telecom systems, data centers, and even government offices. Their servers didn't just provide internet, they secretly copied and transmitted sensitive information abroad. This included maps of mineral reserves, minutes from cabinet meetings, and even personal profiles of millions of Africans. All of this was collected without consent, stored offshore, and allegedly shared with both corporations and foreign governments. And that leaves us with one critical question. If a nation's data, the very lifeblood of modern governance, is controlled by outsiders, can true sovereignty still exist? For many across Africa, what happened in Burkina Faso isn't being seen as just another security operation. It's being described as the first battle in a much bigger confrontation. This isn't about land or borders anymore. It's about digital borders, who controls the codes, the wires, and the data streams that guide national decisions. Tonight, we'll bring you the full story. We'll look at the targets hit during the raids, the evidence uncovered, the regional reaction, and the growing diplomatic tension with Israel. We'll also examine how international media is framing this event, and why more African governments are now openly talking about a new doctrine of digital sovereignty, laws that would guarantee African data stays in African hands. This is not just another headline. For many, it feels like a turning point, a moment that could redefine African independence in the 21st century. Not on paper maps, but across satellites, fiber optic cables, and the invisible infrastructure of the digital age. If this story resonates with you, don't let it fade away. Say it with us. Africa bows to no one. If you believe in Africa's right to freedom and sovereignty, subscribe and stand with us. Now, let's dive into the details of what is already being called Operation Clear Sight. According to official government statements, the order was issued at exactly 5 a.m. last Thursday. By 7 a.m., security forces had launched a coordinated strike on 17 different locations across Ouagadougou. The raids were carried out with precision, leaving no chance for resistance or escape. One of the first targets was a sleek, glass-paneled office on the city's eastern edge. On paper, it was registered as a digital agriculture NGO. But inside, investigators uncovered racks of servers, encrypted routers, and data storage units linked directly to IP addresses traced back to Herzliya, Israel. Another location, a small warehouse just 2 blocks away from the Ministry of Education, held databases containing personal details of nearly 2 million Burkina citizens. Names, addresses, biometric scans, call logs, even 8 years' worth of metadata. And that was just the beginning. Many citizens were outraged by the possibility that their personal data had been harvested without consent and sold off to foreign interests. For others, the operation became a turning point, proof that African nations no longer needed to remain passive in the face of technological exploitation. As of now, all 17 seized sites remain sealed under military guard. Evidence collection continues, and officials say more disclosures are expected in the coming days. This marked the end of the first phase. the raids themselves. Now, attention shifts to the hidden background, a story spanning 15 years of digital surveillance networks quietly embedded across Africa. According to intelligence documents released after the strikes, companies linked to Israel had entrenched themselves across West and East Africa since the late 2000s. They arrived under the banners of development aid, telecom partnerships, and digital innovation programs. Publicly, they promised efficiency, connectivity, and progress. But behind the scenes, their systems were designed to harvest and export sensitive information. Experts trace the roots of this network to a wave of Israeli startups positioning themselves as leaders in cybersecurity and telecom solutions for developing nations. Subsidiaries appeared in Lagos, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, and Accra. On paper, their goal was to boost education, agriculture, and connectivity. In practice, investigators now allege these systems secretly duplicated data streams and rerouted them to servers in Herzliya and Tel Aviv. For nearly 15 years, this vast structure operated in plain sight yet unnoticed. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and testimonies from former employees now reveal a systematic operation. Telecom hubs in multiple capitals reportedly rerouted ministerial phone calls. Server farms collected biometric databases originally meant for voter registration. AI-driven surveillance labs installed cameras in public spaces, feeding facial recognition software. Analysts say this amounted to nothing less than a new kind of occupation, not territorial, but digital. No troops were stationed, no borders redrawn. Control was enforced instead through fiber cables, code, and satellites. Material captured during the Burkina Faso raids supports this conclusion. One seized router, photographed inside a national telecom switchboard, was confirmed to be transmitting copies of every government call to a foreign server. These included confidential briefings, military orders, and strategy meetings. Another recovered file contained high-resolution satellite imagery of Burkina Faso's mineral-rich regions. The maps, marked with military precision, highlighted gold and manganese deposits as well as transport routes. Cross-checks later confirmed identical copies were stored in Israeli data repositories. Dr. Fata Diallo, a political analyst in Dakar, summarized the findings bluntly. This is not development assistance. This is exploitation rebranded. When your resources are mapped abroad and your citizens' data is stored offshore, sovereignty is lost in everything but name. The scale of compromised data has shocked both experts and the public. In Burkina Faso alone, over 2 million citizen profiles were discovered in a single facility. Extrapolated to Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia, where similar firms operated, the total could reach tens of millions. These profiles included biometric scans, national ID numbers, and even health records. Officials warned this data could be weaponized, used to manipulate elections, sway markets, or pressure governments through leaks. What's striking is how this infiltration succeeded not through invasion, but through acceptance. African governments signed contracts, welcomed aid, and celebrated flashy inaugurations. Smiling logos and upbeat slogans masked the truth. Backdoors had been built into systems that citizens relied on daily. Civil society organizations now warn that trust in genuine international partnerships could collapse. If aid agencies and NGOs can be used as covers for espionage, how can communities tell the difference? The revelations have also rattled the African Union. Delegates from Mali, Guinea, and Niger have demanded a continent-wide audit of all foreign technology firms. Nigeria's representative asked at a recent panel, if 2 million profiles were stolen from one small country, how many more have been taken from larger states without our knowledge? Diplomatic consequences are severe. Israel has not officially responded, though Prime Minister Netanyahu called Captain Traoré the day after the raids, attempting to downplay the findings. But Burkina Faso's government insists this is not an isolated case, but evidence of a systematic strategy. Security experts in Europe and the US are privately acknowledging the scope of the discovery, with some admitting that Western intelligence has long relied on similar private contractors, raising suspicions that the network extended beyond Israel alone. For ordinary Africans, however, the story is simple. For 15 years, the continent has lived under an invisible layer of surveillance, its decisions tracked, its resources cataloged, its people reduced to data points. Operation Clear Sight did not create this reality. It merely exposed it. And with exposure has come reaction. Across the region, governments are mobilizing, citizens are protesting, and a new framework for digital sovereignty is being drafted. One morning's raids in Burkina Faso have ignited a continental debate about independence in the digital age. If you believe Africa's time has come, write Amen in the comments below. In our next report, we will turn to the immediate aftermath of the Ouagadougou raids, the regional responses, the protests in the streets, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré's fiery declaration that Africa will never again be treated as a testing ground. The regional response has already begun reshaping diplomatic dynamics. Some international companies rushed to adjust, promising compliance with new transparency rules. Others, particularly European contractors, voiced hesitation and concern. Meanwhile, delegations from China, Russia, and India expressed willingness to build data centers inside Africa while fully respecting local regulations. The African Union also moved quickly. Delegates from 25 member states convened an emergency session in Addis Ababa. Nigeria's representative delivered a striking declaration. If one nation is spied on, all of us are spied on. If one loses sovereignty, all of us lose. The chamber erupted in applause, signaling that what began in Burkina Faso could evolve into a continent-wide policy shift. Still, not every reaction has been supportive. Western governments issued cautious statements urging restraint and warning against what they described as isolationist policies. Editorials in Paris and London portrayed the new doctrine as destabilizing, while think tanks in Washington labeled it radical. Yet momentum within Africa continues to build. A poll conducted by the Institute for Pan-African Studies in Accra found that 68% of respondents support the creation of digital sovereignty laws in their own countries. Among people under 30, support rose to 82%. As this news bulletin continues, attention now turns to the global confrontation that has unfolded. Following the raids in the regional summit, Israel and its allies entered a tense diplomatic exchange with African leaders. Within 24 hours of the operation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu placed a direct call to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. According to sources in Ouagadougou, the call lasted around 12 minutes. Netanyahu insisted that Israel's activities in Africa were developmental, not espionage. He warned that Burkina Faso risked destabilizing not only itself but the entire West African region. Traoré's response, later disclosed by officials, was firm. There is no misunderstanding when you spy on us. That is not development. That is occupation. The call ended without resolution, and Netanyahu did not attempt to contact Ouagadougou again. The exchange quickly became global news. In Paris, newspapers labeled Traoré authoritarian. In London, commentators described him as destabilizing. In Washington, think tanks branded him a radical threat to stability. But on African streets, the response was entirely different. Demonstrations spread quickly. In Bamako, students chanted, "Africa is not for sale." In Conakry, mothers marched under banners reading, "Digital sovereignty is national sovereignty." In Ouagadougou, citizens painted walls with the slogan, "Our data, our choice." International media coverage sharply diverged. Western outlets largely echoed government concerns, while African and some Asian outlets highlighted the exposure of foreign surveillance. Al Jazeera described the revelations as the unveiling of a hidden empire. China's Global Times called it a turning point in Africa's technological independence. Russian media portrayed the events as evidence of Western hypocrisy. Diplomatic pressure quickly mounted. In Brussels, EU officials warned that sanctions could follow if Burkina Faso pursued policies seen as violating international investment norms. In Washington, the State Department urged restraint, cautioning against reactionary isolationism. France suspended military training programs, citing erosion of trust. But the pushback was not one-sided. Delegations from China, India, and Russia publicly backed Africa's digital sovereignty framework. China offered to build fiber optic backbones under African ownership. India pledged to establish data centers while providing training and jobs. Russia offered cybersecurity expertise under African oversight. For the first time in decades, African governments found themselves not as aid recipients, but as negotiators setting terms. As one Ghanaian official declared, "The world is at our table. We will decide the rules." The media battle intensified as well. Hashtags like #AfricaRise, #OurDataWarChoice, and #AfricaNotForSale trended widely, often eclipsing Western narratives. Independent African journalists began producing detailed reports exposing how data extraction influenced mining contracts, food pricing, and even fuel policies. One investigative program in Lagos revealed that foreign-built algorithms had shaped fuel decisions in West Africa. Public sentiment hardened. A survey by the African Institute for Policy Research found that 71% of Africans distrust Western tech companies operating on the continent. Among younger respondents, distrust rose to 85%. At the African Union, delegates openly debated enshrining digital sovereignty as a principle equal to defending territorial borders. Nigeria's representative summarized the mood: if one nation's data is stolen, all nations are at risk. For Israel and its allies, the situation grew increasingly difficult. Their early attempts to dismiss the raids as exaggerated collapsed under the weight of evidence. Photographs of seized servers, intercepted routers, and leaked contracts spread widely online. Independent cybersecurity experts in South Africa and Kenya confirmed the authenticity of several documents, lending credibility to Burkina Faso's claims. The confrontation is now more than diplomacy; it has become a battle of narratives. And this time, Africa's voice is louder than ever. In Ouagadougou, Captain Traoré addressed the press once more: "A pariah to those who exploit us is a partner to those who respect us." The question is not whether we will be isolated. The question is which side of history you will stand on. As this bulletin continues, we turn to the next stage: the economic and social consequences of digital sovereignty. Internet speeds, data security, and public trust are already showing signs of transformation. In the 6 months since the raids, officials in Ouagadougou report internet speeds have doubled, while consumer data costs dropped nearly in half. New contracts with regional providers, enforced by transparency rules, are delivering tangible benefits. National agencies confirm cybersecurity breaches have fallen by 47% compared to the year before. Burkina Faso's government has introduced sweeping policies. All citizen data must be stored on servers physically located inside the country. Foreign companies must undergo regular third-party audits, and violations will result in immediate contract termination. Once dismissed as radical, these measures are now being studied across Africa. Nigeria, Kenya, and Morocco have already announced similar legislation. Economically, the shift has had two major effects. First, foreign firms reliant on opaque practices are withdrawing. Several European contractors have suspended operations, claiming the new conditions are unworkable. Second, new partnerships are emerging. India pledged to build regional data centers. Russia proposed cybersecurity academies. Chinese companies are laying fiber cables under contracts that guarantee African ownership. The private sector is also evolving. African startups once sidelined are entering spaces dominated by multinationals. In Accra, a Ghanaian firm launched a cloud storage service certified under the new sovereignty rules. In Lagos, a fintech provider relocated its servers from Europe back to Nigeria to comply with local laws. Analysts believe this could spark a new wave of indigenous digital industries. Socially, the changes are equally profound. Across campuses from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, students now discuss digital sovereignty as part of civic identity. At the University of Conakry, a lecturer described it as the second independence. In Ouagadougou's markets, vendors talk openly about the right to data protection alongside land and resources. Public surveys show digital sovereignty is increasingly seen as a national right, not just a technical issue. Grassroots movements echo this. Activists have adopted slogans such as "No cloud unless it's ours." In Bamako, street murals depict chains of data being broken by young Africans. In Johannesburg, Community radio stations host debates on defending sovereignty not only in politics, but in cyberspace. Internationally, the consequences remain unsettled. Western governments continue to warn of sanctions if Africa blocks established firms. Yet divisions are emerging within Europe. German and Spanish companies have rebranded themselves as digital sovereignty compliant, marketing respect for African data laws as a competitive advantage. French and British firms, however, remain hesitant, creating visible tension inside the European Union. While some companies on the continent have adapted quickly, these two major players have resisted the shift, fearing both compliance costs and loss of influence. Their reluctance has only deepened divisions within Europe over how to respond to Africa's new digital stance. Meanwhile, the African Union is edging closer to making the digital sovereignty framework an official continental standard. At an extraordinary late-night session in Addis Ababa, delegates debated fiercely. The majority expressed support for elevating the principle to a pan-African level, with Nigeria taking the lead in demanding strong enforcement mechanisms. A final resolution is expected at the next O Summit, and if passed, it could reshape Africa's relationship with the global digital economy. Experts caution, however, that challenges remain enormous. Building secure data centers, training a new generation of local engineers, and establishing oversight mechanisms that cannot be corrupted will require vast resources. Critics argue that without sustained investment and political will, digital sovereignty could become little more than a slogan. Yet supporters counter that the symbolic shift itself has already changed the tone of Africa's place in global negotiations. Evidence of this was clear in Davos at the World Economic Forum. There, delegates from Burkina Faso and Guinea stood side by side and declared boldly, "Data is Africa's new resource, and it will not be exported for free." The statement drew applause from some quarters, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Analysts note that for the first time, Africa is no longer being cast as a passive participant in global digital markets. Instead, it is emerging as an actor capable of setting its own terms. For ordinary citizens, the shift is becoming visible in daily life. In Ouagadougou, new community internet centers have opened, providing affordable and secure access under the new regulatory framework. Families now stream lectures and medical consultations without the fear of being watched. In Abuja, Nigeria's communications minister announced a full audit of all foreign-built networks, promising accountability and transparency. In Rabat, Morocco passed laws requiring every cloud provider to store data locally. But perhaps the most significant change is cultural. Sovereignty is no longer discussed only in terms of borders, armies, or natural resources. It is now tied to servers, cables, and algorithms. During a public forum in Nairobi, one student captured the spirit of this moment when he said, "Our independence was won on the battlefield. Our future will be won in the cloud." The implications are clear. Operation Clear Sight has not only dismantled hidden infrastructure, it has ignited a movement. The real question now is whether Africa can maintain unity, build the necessary capacity, and enforce its new rules in the face of relentless external pressure. As this bulletin reaches its conclusion on the immediate consequences, the spotlight turns to the long-term future. Will digital sovereignty remain only a rallying cry, or will it evolve into a permanent pillar of African governance? The answer may shape not just the next decade of technology policy, but the destiny of Africa itself. From the very beginning, Operation Clear Sight was seen as a bold dawn raid on 17 facilities in Ouagadougou. But it has grown into something much larger. It became the unveiling of a hidden empire, the drafting of a new doctrine, and the beginning of a continental movement. The evidence uncovered, from 2 million stolen citizen profiles to satellite maps and intercepted government calls, shook Africa's political foundations. The regional response, not just from Burkina Faso but also from Mali, Guinea, Niger, Togo, Ghana, and beyond, showed a determination to defend digital borders with the same intensity once reserved for physical territory. Globally, the confrontation remains unresolved. Western governments continue to describe Africa's actions as destabilizing. Yet across the continent, public opinion is clear and unwavering. Data is not a commodity to be traded without consent. It is a national resource and a collective right. The economic and social consequences are already visible: cheaper internet, faster connections, a renewed trust in local companies, and new opportunities for African startups. But the larger question looms: can this momentum survive external pushback? Can Africa truly enforce its new rules under pressure from more powerful global players? As one official put it during the debates in Addis Ababa, this is Africa's Monroe Doctrine for the digital age. Whether it becomes permanent policy or fades into rhetoric will define the next chapter of African independence. This concludes our coverage of Operation Clear Sight. For many, it is not simply another story of espionage or conflict. It is the moment Africa chose to rise, not in silence, but in strength. And now, to you watching, if this story moved you, do not let it fade. Say it with me: Africa bows to no one. If your heart beats for Africa's freedom, subscribe and stand with us.